I said before that Frances Moore Lappé is the author of Diet for a Small Planet. That's probably how most of you know her, but she's written many other books. And most recently, Daring Democracy, Igniting Power, Meaning, and Connection for the America We Want, written with Adam Eichen. She's also co-founder, along with her daughter Anna, of the Small Planet Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that's dedicated to promoting an empowering vision of democracy. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Frances Moore Lappé. Hi there.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
I am absolutely delighted. I'm so impressed with your work. I honor it.
Thank you. You know what, before we had a chance to talk a little bit before, and we talked about that your friends call you Frankie. Yeah. And so I didn't want our audience to think that I was just, calling you Frankie without asking permission first. So that's okay, right?
Yes, I like it.
Excellent. Well, let's start. When Diet for a Small Planet was published, it was revolutionary. And now, a lot more people agree with your ideas, and we've come to understand the importance of the food system in our lives. But when you look at the food system in America today, what are the problems with our current food system?
Well, they are a much more severe version than what I met when I started asking, why is there hunger in the world? That was my first question. They're much more severe because, well, let me just back up and say that one of the key lessons of this whole 50-year journey is that we human beings see the world not as it is, but as we are. We see through filters, through a belief system, and we literally can't see what doesn't fit inside that frame. And so we've come increasingly over these 5 decades to fall for this frame of, oh, the free market. The market is free and everybody is free to consume what they need in the market. So, hey, let's just let it do its thing. And that has made it impossible for us to see that we have a market of a very particular kind that concentrates wealth, until now we have 3 billionaires who control more wealth than the bottom half of us. So we moved over my lifetime from the idea that government is our servant, if you will. Government can do good things. Like when I started, I was a part of the war on poverty in the 1960s, and going door to door in the poorest neighborhoods, helping people find their voice to get what they needed to thrive. So it was very much then that government was our partner. And then over these years, we've fallen for this idea that we have to leave everything to this impersonal force. But unfortunately, it is triggered by highest return to existing wealth. So we end up with among the greatest, we are at the extreme in the world in economic inequality. And that then plays out in hunger, in poor nutrition, in so many devastating ways.
Absolutely. And, the food industry's main goal is to make a profit. And that's often in conflict with protecting our health, protecting the environment. What if we had a government that was really mediating this conflict? What is the correct role for government?
Well, government is our voice, right? So it sets the rules and norms that benefit all of us. And we've accepted that in many ways, that we don't, we limit the sale. For example, cigarettes, were really big in my lifetime, and everybody in my family smoked. but gradually we saw cigarettes as terrible for public health. And gradually, advertising was limited. And we have made a huge progress in decreasing. I hardly see people smoking today compared to when I was growing up. And so we know that government is there, our polity is there to create the rules and norms that support life. And we do it, you know, with traffic lights, certainly, but we must do it with the health of our food. And we must use our instrument of government to identify that which is dangerous. And today, 60% of our calories lack virtually all nutrition. We are now to this highly processed diet, again, emerging over the last 50 years. 60% of our calories don't give us nutrition. And we need warnings, we need public information campaigns, because this is devastating. And I'll just add on the meat question, because of course, Diet for a Small Planet started with identifying the great waste and loss in our meat-centered diet. But very recently, I found that the World Health Organization has declared red meat a probable carcinogen, and processed meat a carcinogen. Now, that is the kind of thing, you know, what is the role of government? To make that absolutely clear. You know, it should be warning, you know, warning if you're going to allow it, because most people have no idea. You know, when I was growing up, meat was the center of the plate, and it was what you couldn't be healthy without it.
Right. At the food bank, you brought up the issue of hunger, and at the food bank, you know, we're primarily concerned about food insecurity and families that can't afford adequate food. What do you think we should be doing in America today to make food more affordable and accessible, particularly healthy food?
Well, I think if we needed, we should subsidize healthy food. We certainly should prioritize healthy, delicious food in our schools, and teach. When I was in school, we had cooking classes as part of school, and so that children at lunchtime and at breakfast, if they can get that, do as they do in many European countries, where they fed the really delicious, healthy meals, and children learn about why this is so good for them. So I think, and totally eliminate the sugary drinks from school lunches. And there is effort. My daughters work at Good Real Food Media, and the Good Food Purchasing Program is an effort in now quite a number of major cities to, one, for schools to buy local food and to serve healthy food. And so I think as a democracy, our voices should be heard, that we want our children to grow up not on empty calories, but so that every bite is good for their bodies.
That's such an important point. And, you know, there's a place that school meals are really under the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. There's certainly a way to set higher standards and quality for those meals. In the world generally, you know, we see junk food advertising and fast food advertising and marketing targeted at low-income communities. And I know you talk about this in the book. Can you say more about how we can try to combat that marketing and advertising that just promotes unhealthy eating?
Yes, I know we all are aware, you know, as you're going out the door at a grocery store, it's all the worst things for that, you know, the worst food that could tempt you at the last minute, you know. So again, I think that given the state of our national situation today, I think working at a local and a state level to use the public to ensure that every neighborhood has a supermarket that sells whole foods, and if possible, to include opportunities for people to, with no charge, to be in cooking classes where they can have fun sharing recipes that are both, if we move more toward a whole foods plant-centered diet. I call it plant and planet-centered because climate change is such an important part of moving away from a meat-centered diet, that for a lot of us that takes some learning and the fun of learning new recipes and trying new things. And it's less expensive, of course, because meat is one of the more expensive things that we can buy. And at the end of Diet for a Small Planet, 50th anniversary edition, we do a cost comparison to show people how cost effective it is to get our proteins from beans and peas and lentils, and to recognize that, virtually all food has some protein in it. And so we don't have to be worrying about the higher priced meat that is often unaffordable. So I think it's partly changing our mindset to know that with eating things that are less costly can be really healthier for us, and just understanding that that meat is really a health hazard, a carcinogen hazard, and that as I was saying, that 60% of our calories now give us no nutrition. I mean, I think if people just understood how not only are they getting nothing in terms of nutrition virtually, but the additives that are put into processed foods, all the good stuff is taken out, and then the additives put in, and many of those we don't even know, what are the consequences of these additives. So I think that that organizing locally and approaching grocery stores to put healthier foods, and corner stores, certainly, convenience stores, to put healthier foods in a way that looks as tempting as they are, the best of local and healthy foods. I think that is part of it. And of course, back to kids in school, of starting very young, understanding that our well-being, how much energy we have to play, depends on whether we're eating healthfully. It's not just a you should, scolding finger at all. It's celebrating what makes us feel good.
I'm going to give a plug for a food bank program called Healthy Habits. It does exactly what you were mentioning: free nutrition education, cooking demonstration classes that are plant-centered. But you use an interesting term, planet-centered. Can you say more about that?
Yes, we didn't appreciate when 50 years ago, the climate crisis that is now hitting us already. It's not in the future, it's now. And agriculture and our food system overall contributes about 37% of greenhouse gas emissions, as much as that. So it's very important. And a lot of the worst foods in terms of our health, and grain-fed meat, for example, some of that comes from destroying the rainforest, which is a carbon sink that we need. So the link between, I opened the new book saying what was a great choice in 1971 now is a no contest necessity, because of all we know about health, so much more, but also the climate impact and the well-being of our farmers and farm workers. That nearly half of farm workers around the world are poisoned each year by chemical exposure. So there are just so many ways to think about the plant and planet. All the living creatures on the planet, we're facing the 6th great extinction. I begin with that estimate from David Attenborough. And a lot of that is because of agriculture, monoculture, and agricultural chemicals are decimating our species diversity, in which, all the regeneration we need. Certainly with the climate impact, we need a healthy we need to keep our land healthy. And so it's one of those beautiful things in life where changing our diet it tastes good, it feels good in our bodies, it's good for the earth, it's good for people who work the land, and all of that. And people abroad, not just in our own country, because land is being taken over by corporations to grow export crops, often feed crops for us. That was land that was growing diverse crops for local people. So on all, it's a win-win-win-win is the way I like to think of it.
And so, you just described the impact of our food system on the environment. From another perspective, I think we're all seeing and are concerned about the impact of climate change on farms and growers.
Yes. The other way, absolutely.
Yeah. So can you talk about that too?
Well, I do know that we're already experiencing drought here in the United States, that we didn't expect to be happening this soon. And so we need to be shifting over to certainly one of the things I talk about in the book is agroforestry, the mixing of trees and crops. And I grew up in Texas, where farming to me was driving out of town and just seeing mile after mile of monoculture, right? And yet we now know that the mixing of trees and crops can help deal with drying climate, because the trees shade the soil, so it doesn't the rain doesn't evaporate as fast, and the groundwater doesn't get used as fast. And also the leaves can help provide fertilizer for the crops. And so there are places now in our own country too. Certainly I featured Africa in this because this was an ancient practice that is now coming back, that was eliminated by colonialism, and now is restoring this mixing of crops and trees in the same area, and you actually get more. You get more. It's not like the trees are taking food away from you. You overall get a greater yield. So that is one huge breakthrough that I didn't really realize even a few decade ago. There's an organization called the Savannah Institute. I believe it's based in Wisconsin that I mentioned. That is trying to bring that knowledge of agroforestry to the United States.
Recently, the USDA Secretary Vilsack announced that they're going to devote $1 billion to climate-friendly practices, promoting climate-friendly practices in the U.S. And you've studied so many, innovative solutions and good policy changes in America and around the world. I mean, is what the USDA doing a step in the right direction?
I do believe, yes, it is a step in the right direction, and we have to continue to expand that, because now, most of the agricultural supports go to the wealthiest farmers at the top, and their practices are still this: how can we get every little bit out of the earth, without thinking of the long term? So it's really a shift in, yes, this will help to teach new practices which can actually save farmers money. But what I'm trying to get at is that I learned as I was writing the new edition is that so many of our farmers have been turned almost into contract workers for corporate processors. And so we really need to register that and to support independent family farmers who can make those decisions themselves. Because so much of the control has moved out of their hands and into monopoly hands. They're just, when decades ago there were dozens of seed companies competing, now they're just 3 or 4 competing. And so there's real danger to the farmer just of lack of choice.
And again, this connection back to the work that you're doing in promoting, empowering vision of democracy, where the people recognize that there are monopoly corporations controlling so much of agriculture and the rest of the economy, that our choices are less and less because of that monopoly control.
Absolutely. And again, we talk about the free market. No, it's not free. And part of that is, and I was just looking at the numbers right before our conversation, that there are more than 20 lobbyists in Washington for every person that you and I have elected to serve us there, and that agribusiness lobbyists greatly outnumber even oil and gas lobbyists. And so you have that pressure from the industry that is intent on continuing this grain-fed, meat-centered that we now know is very dangerous at the center of our plate. This is what the World Health Organization tells us, and that glyphosate, for example, which is tied to seeds that are feed crops, this pesticide, it is banned in many countries, and it is associated with great health risks. So if we have a real democracy, right, is one that is answering to the health and the well-being of all its citizens, not to the power of a few. So we've got a big job ahead of us. We rank pretty low in the quality of our democracy worldwide, behind about at least 50 countries. And we think of ourselves as but actually we've got a lot of work to do. So I don't want to be a downer, but to me it's very empowering, actually, to know that we didn't get here by accident, that there's been a very real shift in power toward private wealth, putting that first. From when I was a child, and we were really in the war on poverty. And by the way, that war on poverty, it cut poverty by almost half in 10 years. And that, for social change, that is huge. And we believed then that we could do that. And that was one of the most exciting things in my whole life, was working as part of that war on poverty, because we all felt that we were working together to make sure that everybody had access to their basic need for food and healthcare and housing. I was particularly focused on housing. So we know we have it in our history, in our blood, in a sense that we have done it before, and then we just were sold this message: no, just leave that to the market. And that was a very deliberate campaign, especially during the 80s, in particular, 70s and 80s. And I should throw in this number, that during the 1970s, just think about private agribusiness lobbyists here, but during the 1970s, the number of lobbyists in Washington increased 14-fold in just that one period. It was about a little more than a decade, but basically, so the good news is that we haven't always been so dominated by private interests, and therefore your work, this beautiful work that you do, that we have a long history of learning and stepping up and making change, and I really honor you for that work that you're doing.
Thank you. Over the past 2 years, our lives, our worlds have been turned upside down by COVID. The outbreak of COVID is almost to the day 2 years ago.
Exactly.
And when you reflect on our experience in the pandemic, are there things that we can take from this experience? Are there lessons to be learned?
Certainly there are. I should add that I was an early adopter. I got COVID March 11, so 2 years ago. But so it's a very personal personal connection that you're making. And what I sense is that even if it's not completely conscious, that we now know that we live or die together, that we are all connected, and it's not an abstraction, that that we are all, when some of us are made ill by poor diet and poor living conditions, we are all affected. And so I think that sense of togetherness, and maybe even not conscious, but that co-responsibility, that what we do affects others. I certainly hope that that's a continuing realization, and that and I hope also that we can see, about how fragile our democracy is, given what happened a year ago, January, or 2020, whatever it was, January 6th. That that every democratic entity, every way of making decisions together can be undercut. And so democracy is, I love to quote the first African-American appellate judge, William Hastie, who said that democracy is easily lost, but never finally won. Its essence is eternal struggle. But it is this, what John Lewis, I think, called the good fight, right? Eternal struggle is not, but it's our values, it's our sense of community. And that's what you are working for, where people can feel that connection with those who don't even have those basic nutritious food. So that's what I'm hoping, that this period of both of isolation, but also yearning for togetherness and feeling that connection through the spread of the disease, I think it could make a profound difference in our culture.
Well, I really hope that is an outcome from this time period, that we understand that connection to each other better. Frankie, I know that our audience members have lots of questions for you, but before we go to those questions, I just a little bit lighter side. When Diet for a Small Planet was published, it included vegetarian recipes that many of us have enjoyed for many, many years. And then I saw the 50th anniversary edition has all these new recipes. So before we go to the audience for questions, I just was wondering if you could tell us, because it's just going to stay here. Which recipes are your favorites?
Well, I wanted to show you that in addition to sprucing up, bringing all of the original recipes up to the 21st century, so they're all been improved and sparked, but we also got very special chefs to offer us their favorite recipes. And I think mine is, now who could resist this? This is from Padma Lakshmi. Padma's yellow velvet lentil soup with cumin and dried plums. I mean, who would not like that? And then on the really simple side, I have something in here that I've made for years. It's called carrot and onion, comforting carrot and onion soup. And it's just the simplest thing in the world, but I just find it, just so soothing, the combination of those flavors. And I served it when the New York Times interviewed me. I served it to the interviewer. So I just asked people to know that, I got to tell you a funny on the recipes. My daughter said, "Mom, do you know that you have dozens of references to margarine in your book?" Because back in the 1970s, it turns out that the sugar industry wanted to divert people from sugar, and so they made fat into the big boogeyman, and we couldn't have fat. So we all thought, young cooks at the time thought, oh, margarine was healthy. And so we have now taken out all of the margarine references and put in healthy oils. So that's certainly one change. But yeah, they're just really, I made the carrot cake with cream cheese frosting the other night, and I have to say, I took it down to our downstairs neighbors and I got a thumbs up. So there are a lot of some, you know, like Lakshmi, they're new international recipes, and then all the others have been spruced up. Molly Katzen, also many of you might know Molly. She's a friend, and she offered a recipe of hers, and she's
Mark
just
Bittman, Jose
Mark
Andres.
Bittman, yes, you know Mark Bittman. He was the columnist for the New York Times and has written a number of books on this very topic. So I was very honored that I had these great chefs contribute as well.
It's terrific. Okay, so now I want to introduce the Chief Philanthropy Officer at the Food Bank, Lisa Roth-Blackman. Lisa has been monitoring the questions that are coming in Q&A box. If you have questions, keep typing them in, but take it away, Lisa.
All right. Hi, Andrew. Thank you. And thank you, Francis. It's great to have you with us here today. We've got a bunch of great questions. So I'm going to dive in first with just a comment of one of our guests, Jeanette, and I'll pop it over so everyone can see, who decided to study nutrition and become a dietitian nutritionist because of your book. And she's very excited to be here, and she's 65. So you've had quite an influence on folks here. I'm just going to run through, there's a bunch of great questions here. One is about, you're going back to your point about red meat being a carcinogen. Do you have any knowledge or anything to say about whether there's any chance it's because of genetically modified grains being fed to the animals?
No, that's not. All I know is that the WHO announces on its website, and by the way, I said this once on an interview on radio, and the interviewer didn't believe me, and he went in real time, he fact checked me, and he went on the World Health Organization website, and it says that red meat is a probable carcinogen and that processed meat is a carcinogen. So, you know, that it was just so shocking to me. I had no idea it was that. You know, we think we give hot dogs to little kids, and that's one of the forms of processed meat. So I think that they would make that clear if that had just been as a result, because GMOs are very new on the scene relative to grain-fed meat. So I can't imagine that it has to do with that. I'm not sure of all of, you know, I'm not a nutritionist by training, so but it is there. You can check it on the World Health Organization website.
Got it. Thank you. While we're talking about meat, I'm going to jump to the question about the artificial meats like the Impossible burgers. And our questioner, Michael, is saying, I don't really like them and they're so processed, but are they a necessary evil if they can serve as a gateway food for diehard meat eaters?
Oh, the gateway. Yeah, I think the gateway is really discovering the fun of eating in the plant world and all the different varieties of foods that are there. That was true for me. If people say, oh, didn't you feel like you were losing something when you moved to a plant-centered diet? I said, no, it was all discovery. You know, that's where the very tastes are, the textures are, the colors are. So I think trying to produce something that looks like meat is taking us just in the wrong direction. And as the questioner said, it's highly processed, and we need that fiber. We definitely need that fiber. So no, I'm not a fan. And it also continues the kind of corporate control in which the farmers get such a tiny fraction. Whereas if we shop, especially at farmers markets, but if we shop where we can and ask grocery store managers to buy local, then we know that we aren't contributing to this highly corporate concentrated processed food industry. So the fake burgers just keep that whole monopoly processed food engine going. So I don't see any virtue. You know, yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Luisa, one of our large member agencies in Central Falls that serves a largely Latinx and immigrant community in Rhode Island. And she's asking about disparities in hunger today. And I think connecting it to your work with the war on poverty. And, maybe just you can comment a little bit on, you did make all that progress back when that was going on in the 70s and 80s. And what's changed now, or how is it different, or what can we do? That was a lot of ways of throwing that question, but maybe to just sort of comment on how we've lost ground there, it seems.
Yeah, well, I just want to give one big fact about these generations that I've lived through, that I was born in the 40s, my children were born in the 70s. 40s to the 70s, every income strata doubled its real family income. We were all gaining. And then from my children, the early 70s on to today, the wealth just rushes to the top. The wealthiest are gaining the most year after year. So, but that could sound really depressing, or it could remind us it doesn't have to be this way, that we had tax rules and we had government programs like I was part of. I was going door to door, organizing people who were receiving welfare benefits to make sure that they got what they were entitled to, because they were so intimidated and really insulted and by the welfare department. And so, just to remember that we can stand up together and ensure that we are all gaining, not just the wealthiest. And yes, that has to do with how we tax, and it has to do with that helping people get really good housing so that they have access to shopping, access to grocery stores that sell good food, and so that's supporting families in purchasing homes, and the opposite of the kind of just extreme, departmentalization of our communities that we have today. So there's much that we can learn from the past, and it's mainly shedding this idea, which was so promoted in the 1980s, that like Ronald Reagan said, government is the problem, not the solution. And a lot of people bought that. And so then if government is the problem, then leave it to the market, and the market just concentrates. So it's not a big mystery how we got here. And I think, that's one thing about being an elder, is that I lived through it, and I can see it. And so I think those of us who have that longer perspective, we need to encourage young people. It doesn't have to be this way. And many other countries, I was just so curious to be looking at what other countries do with school lunches, for example. And in France, kids get 40% of their calories from these really gorgeous meals, because they value that. That's part of their culture. And they get 40% of their daily calories from that on average. And so, clearly we have the resources to provide school lunches of that quality here as well. And that could and breakfast for kids who come in and needing breakfast. So clearly we have the wealth to provide what other countries do. We can also do things like tax, as I'm sure you're aware of the sugar taxes that have been tried, the soda taxes that have been tried. Well, that tax could then be shifted over to support healthy foods, to support these much more healthy local school lunches, like, good food purchasing program that my daughter works with is doing. So there are answers that don't require a complete, revolution of our system, but could make a huge difference.
There has been effort here to try to implement one of those sugary drink taxes. It hasn't passed yet. And the goal is to incentivize SNAP in the grocery store, so double people's SNAP dollars on fresh produce. So yeah, there are lots of ideas out there. That hasn't happened yet here, but all right, so we have a question from Karen in the audience, who worked in public health for 10 years and found that most people knew what they should and shouldn't be eating, but just didn't necessarily do it, and was wondering how we encourage the individual to do and buy the right thing when it's so easy not to.
Yeah, well, I believe in the buddy system. My philosophy is that we learn from each other all the time, and just making a change all by ourselves can feel really intimidating and not knowing where to start. So I would suggest find, and maybe you already do this, but find one buddy who is thinks they should do this, but they're not quite sure how to shift to a more whole foods, plant-centered diet that is healthier. And I'm not saying everybody should become a vegetarian. I'm just, it's we know that it's healthy to eat in a wide variety of foods in the plant world, and unprocessed, and not highly processed, and not sugar, right? So find somebody else who wants to experiment, and then try one thing and say, oh, if I did this a little bit, my family would like it even more. I mean, be an experimenter. I never follow a recipe, not even my own. I like to throw in different herbs or try different things. So I think that's one tip, is just don't try to do it yourself. Just find somebody who's also maybe wants to make a change and not quite sure how, and then scout around and find where you can find the that you can actually get access to fresh foods. And I hope that there's so many wonderful books that offer plant-centered recipes, but also in so many cultures, in India, or in Latin America, where combinations of grains of various types and legumes, peas, beans, and lentils, that's been the history of their cuisine. And then they do beautiful things with that, but it's not like a newfangled thing. So to maybe draw on your culture's history of how these combinations of food, and that's what I loved about it when I first learned about, you combine these foods and you get this wonderful protein, and that this is a way that human beings have always eaten, it's combinations of grains and peas, beans, and lentils. And now we know you don't have to do that to get enough protein, but I just think it's kind of cool that traditionally people have made that the center of their diet, these combos.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Cindy, a friend of ours. Hi, Cindy. Diet for a Small Planet changed my life as a young adult. Decades later, how do you translate the joy of healthy eating and caring for the planet to folks who don't see the connection between what we eat and the state of our world?
Give them my book. No, yeah, well, why not? Well, I think that, the way I talk about it in Diet for Small Planet is what's so beautiful about food is that we make choices every single day, multiple times a day. And this is one thing that we know, every choice we make and don't make is rippling out. If we are buying processed foods, then we can just imagine those people who are in the factories and those terrible conditions. If we are buying food that has been treated with chemicals, then we know that farm workers have been treated with chemicals. I think, almost half of farmers and farm workers are poisoned by pesticides every year. So think about all the good that you're doing with that bite. It's rippling out and saying, oh, everything we purchase, right, is sending a signal out to the market about where to grow, where to expand. So I like to say the only choice we don't have is whether to change the world, because every choice we're making does send those signals out. And so when we enjoy, say, a classic black beans and rice dinner, then that's sending those signals out to grow more of that, and hopefully organic if at all possible. So I don't know, to me it's just a win-win. And if we start with food, and I called it my act of rebel sanity when I first started moving in this way, that I knew my choices wouldn't change the world, but darn it, I was gonna make the good choices for myself and the world. And I said, yeah, well, I'll be more convincing to myself that way, and therefore more convincing to others. So you never know all the ripples that you're making.
Thank you. Yeah, we have in the questions lots of comments about how people do know how to do this and that there are low cost, easy meals to make. And, you know, I think you spoke a little bit about this, but I'll pose the question again. How do we educate parents on a better diet and then also have schools educate children on the basics of some of the very points that you're talking about? And that a lot of this has been passed down in many communities from grandparents to parents to grandchildren. And how do we sort of make sure everybody gets that knowledge?
Yeah, well, I don't have a magic, you know, answer, but I do think the more that for children we can in any way present this as an adventure and not as, oh, you shouldn't do this, you should do this, but really physically engage them in choosing and in cooking if possible, and in learning about their own cultures so that they feel like, oh, my grandpa did that, and so I'm carrying on that and having a certain pride in that, in the legacy that you're carrying on, as well as just kids. You know, we all want to be healthy, and now since I wrote Diet for Small Planet, the diabetes rates have just skyrocketed 4 or 5 times. You know, and we know that diabetes can really wreck your life. You know, really. I had a very close friend with that disease, and it really interfered with the quality of his life and shortened it. So, you know, there's that kids like, you know, to be healthy, to play sports and all of that, to be strong. And so to use that kind of, oh, you know, your body gets stronger, not you should, this is bad for you, you should eat this. But, you know, the things that children care most about is, right, is feeling vital. And I do think that, and I think it's true for all of us, that sugar can be kind of addictive. The more you eat them, then the more you want. And so I think so important starting with children to ensure that they don't get hooked at an early age. So everything we can do to make healthy food tempting and involve them in it is wonderful.
That's great. And you have a suggestion and a question here about, have you ever considered writing a book or a version of the book for young adults and being a part of teaching kids and young adults how to do this?
Yeah, I don't think I have it in me now. What I'm focused on now, I call it the taproot of democracy that is so challenged here. But I love that idea, and I hope somebody's listening who would do that. I think the more that we can get these recipes out and the philosophy out and the joy out and the beauty, that's why I love the cover of the book, you know, that my daughter insisted we make it really beautiful. And so that's really the spirit of this, is beauty on every level.
Excellent. And I have going back to the recipes for a minute, there's a question from Barbara about whether you would share your original recipe for rye bread in an iron skillet. I'm fascinated by this. I'm not familiar with it. I loved it, but I cannot find it in the book.
Oh dear. Yeah, I can certainly go, but I have all the editions and I will go and look for that. So if you email, I'm really easy to find. Small Planet Institute is my little organization, and there are just a few of us. And if you just send an email to me at info@smallplanet, I will get it, and I'll go look for it as soon as we hang up and see where I can find it. I'm really curious. I want to make it again.
Thank you. And then we just have a comment or two. I'll just move them over of folks that have heard you speak in the past and are really excited to be here. So clearly you have a fan club here in Rhode Island and all around. Andrew, I'm going to invite you back on for any closing comments and remarks. And Frances, thank you again.
My great pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa. Frankie, thank you so much for being here today virtually in Rhode Island. It's really a pleasure to meet you, and thanks so much for taking this time to answer all of our questions. And I am very grateful to everyone who joined us today in the audience.